Hello guys, Colin here, and I'm in Denmark visiting TC Electronic, and I've got Tor here with me.
Hey guys!
And we thought that it would be a good idea, since you do all the effects, would go off. What's the difference between phaser, chorus, and flanger?
Yes.
And you're the man in the know.
I try to be. I have to say, there's right on the other side of this door and this window over here, there are people who are way more in the know than me. But I'm really good at pretending to be in the know, though. So that's my job here at TC, I guess. But yeah, I do know a little bit about effects and how they work. Where do we start?
Well, we'll start in the signal chain here with a phaser.
Yeah.
I've done a video on phaser before, so if I can remember things, it is that we take a signal in, we duplicate it.
Yeah.
One signal passes through completely clean.
Yeah.
And we pass the second signal through some phase shifting elements.
Yeah.
All pass filters, I believe, was what I was talking about.
Yeah.
Which moves the phase by a certain amount.
Yeah.
And then they're recombined at the end.
Yeah.
And the movement of the two of them against each other gives a phasing sound.
Exactly, yeah. So there are different versions of how you do phasing, but essentially you have these filters with some very sharp cues, which basically means that if you look at a regular guitar signal and you imagine it's like a flat line, it really isn't, but let's just for the sake of argument imagine that it is. So it's a flat line. What you do is you basically take certain parts of the signal, basically make spikes, really sharp spikes. So you have like, it would look like a mountainous or little flagpoles going up like this. And then you take those spikes that will be, basically everything else is much lower, and those spikes will be your guitar signal now. So the signal will be very changed compared to what it would sound like if you heard this kind of flat thing. Yeah. So you have these typically 4 spikes. If you look at like a very famous orange pedal from MXR. Yeah. You have 4 of those spikes, and then you move them. So you shift them through the frequency spectrum. So they're not fixed in one place, but you basically sweep them from the high frequencies towards the low frequencies and back again. And when you combine that with the dry signal, you get all these phasing issues, which, typically if you have phasing issues with like in a stereo signal, it's annoying. Yes. But now it becomes, part of the sound, and suddenly it sounds cool. And what you can do on a phaser is you can then add more or less of them. So, as I said, on a phase 90, you have 4. Yeah,
but you can more of those notches.
Exactly, you can add more of them. So on some, theoretically you can add as many as you want. But a lot of pedals have, some kind of selector where you can go from, say, 4 to 8 to 10 to 12 or something like that. And typically, the more you add, the more smooth and nice it's going to sound. So that's pretty much a phaser. I think that when you hear flanger and chorus and phaser, and especially if you set it to a fairly subtle thing, it can be kind of hard to distinguish which one is which. Yes. But the thing is that a flanger and a chorus are completely different in terms of how they're done technically. Yes. Than a phaser. Yeah. But a phaser and a univibe is actually very similar in terms of how they're built. There are some minor differences, but the core algorithm of a univibe pedal is actually very similar to a phaser.
If we move on to the chorus, then chorus would be having, again, duplicating the signal. That's going to be a common theme across all of them. Yeah. But this one, your second signal is being modulated in pitch. Yeah. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. And the weird thing is, it's actually not modulated in pitch. That's just the side
effect of what you're really doing, which is delay.
Yeah, exactly. So you're basically you have your dry signal, and then you have your wet signal. So that's the duplicate, and you delay it by a little bit. Yeah. And what you then do is you modulate that delay, and modulate basically means that you change the amount of delay time. So in this case, it might go from, say, 7 milliseconds to 20 milliseconds and back again. So it's basically going like, if you look at it like a counter, it'd go like start at 20 milliseconds of delay time between the dry signal and the wet signal, and it goes down to 7 milliseconds, and it goes up again. And what happens is that when that change happens, the pitch actually changes, and I really don't know why. The thing is, it does. It actually it does change the pitch. So an example of that is if you ever, if you found yourself standing on the street, there's an ambulance driving by.
It's the Doppler effect.
It is. So when the ambulance, right when it crosses your field of view or your ears, it actually goes from one pitch to another pitch.
Yeah.
So now if you imagined you had complete control over that ambulance and you could actually move it back and forth like this.
Yeah.
You could actually control that pitch. You can make it go. So that's really what happens. So a chorus is really just that effect in a pedal.
Ambulance in a box.
Yeah.
So I noticed on this pedal as well, you've got chorus and tri-chorus. Just to touch on that briefly, what's a tri-chorus about?
Okay, so the tri-chorus is basically a variation of a regular chorus. So if you imagine you have two people singing at the same time, and one guy is singing straight on pitch, exactly on pitch. Doesn't really happen, but let's just say
the perfect singer.
Yeah, is always on pitch, and the other guy is kind of wobbly. That's essentially a chorus.
Yeah.
And what happens then if you had these two guys singing at the same time? It would probably be pretty easy to distinguish between who's singing what. Now, if you imagine you added more people, in this case 3, or even if you went nuts and say it's basically a choir, now you have 100 people doing that, suddenly that effect goes from being something where you can easily distinguish the two guys to suddenly it becomes more of a wash. It's a little harder to kind of say you get the effect, but you don't get it like here's the guy who's steady and here's the guy who's like, okay. So, I mean, we can even do it like if we exaggerate this a lot. So let's say we crank this all the way up. We can just take a guitar and turn it up, see what happens. It's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
And you can really hear this kind of wobbly thing, and obviously, unless you're John Scofield, you probably wouldn't use that sound. But then when you switch in the extra 2 voices, which we do now,
it's much more of a natural.
It's more of a natural, and it kind of blends together because now you have 3 voices, and the way we do it inside the pedal is that we add 2 more voices. So it's you take the original signal and you duplicate it 3 times.
Right.
So now you have 4. You have 4 singers instead of 2 singers, and the other 2 singers have their own kind of wobble. It's not the same wobble.
Yeah,
as
the
yeah. So that kind of brings everything together, and you still get the chorusing effect, but it's less of this kind of wiggly thing.
Yeah, I quite like the tri-chorus sound.
It's a classic 80s sound. So if anybody's ever heard anything with, Steve Lukather, Toto things from the 80s, or a bunch of the stuff Michael Landau played on, like Eros Ramazzotti or old James Taylor, stuff like that. Dan Huff, all these 80s LA studio guys, they were all about tri-chorus. That's their thing. It's like the 80s. They liked their chorus. Let's just say it like that.
It was with the effect of the time.
Yeah, and then we get to the flanger.
Yeah,
which you just did a tone print for.
Just did a tone print. Please go and check it out.
Yeah.
So the flanger is very similar to the chorus, and it's fundamental. What it's doing. It's still taking that second line and doing that delay thing to put it in and out of pitch. But what makes a flanger different from a chorus?
Essentially, it's 2 things. The main thing. The main difference is the fact that you actually take the wet signal in a flanger and you feed it back into itself. So the best way to kind of describe that is that everybody knows on a delay you have, some people call it a repeat knob, some people call it a feedback knob, but it's essentially a way where you play something and then you have the pedal play that back once. But if you turn up the feedback, the pedal actually sends part of that repeat back into itself, and then every time it turns it down a little bit, and you can typically control that on the pedal. So you have the option of whether you want 1 million repeats or just 1 or 2 or 3. A flanger is basically doing that exactly the same thing. The only difference is that instead of the delay time on, say, a delay would typically be in like the 300 milliseconds or something like that. So you can hear those repeats coming and coming. On a flanger, that delay time is typically rather short. So, anywhere from almost down to 0 milliseconds, but typically somewhere between, say, 3 milliseconds and 20 milliseconds. So really fast compared to a delay. So you don't hear it as repeats in this kind of ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
It almost becomes this kind of weird drone, like kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that effect is what basically, it's the only thing, to be honest, that really truly separates a flanger from a chorus. That's the ability to feed the signal back into itself.
So it's a bit of feedback and a bit of tweaking the parameters, and you've turned a chorus into a flanger.
Exactly, and to be honest, we could take any two of those in the editor and we could flip them around. Yeah, we could do that. And the other thing is that, interestingly enough, a lot of the sounds that I think people kind of say, oh, that's like a classic chorus sound, like old Police stuff. That's actually flanger. So there is definitely this kind of overlap where you don't know exactly what's what. Yeah. On the other end, there are also certain, like, some Unchained by Van Halen is like a classic example of, like, that's just flanger right there, this kind of jet thing. So it's part of it, as you said, is about that extra feedback loop, and another thing is just how you set the effect to make those sounds. So with that said, there's actually a third pedal that you can do on these, and it would require that I hook up the editor to show you. Let's see here. So now we set it so that we have a nice. Now we have a sort of a chorusing sound, right?
Yeah.
So as you said before, a chorus is really two parts. It's a dry signal that's just bone dry. Yeah. It's exactly what you play. And then there's the other part that's the wet signal that you kind of change the pitch of. So what happens when you take the dry signal out of the mix?
I see where this is going.
Now you have a vibrato.
Yeah.
And you can do the same thing on it. You could do a weird effect that would basically be a vibe. I don't know what you would call it, but it's basically a flanger where you don't have the wet signal. Oh, the dry signal. Yeah. So you'd be able to add feedback to that. I never tried that. I don't know how it sounds.
That would be interesting. I did an experiment.
Yeah. So essentially, to be honest, when you design a chorusing algorithm, whether it's in the digital domain or whether it's in the analog domain, with a little bit of tweaking, you could actually get 3 pedals in one.
Yeah.
Don't tell anybody. But that's how it works, really. So you could say that for these, you would consider that you would say that those are time-based effects because you're basically modulating the time to get a certain effect, whereas this is a filter-based effect.
Yes.
This is a 4-stage.
4-stage.
Yeah. And this is a 10-stage, I think.
Yeah, something got smoother.
Yeah. Compared to.
More harshness on that one as it comes in and out.
And I think a lot of times when people think that they can't tell the difference, it's because there's one thing that a phaser and a flanger have in common, and that's typically where you kind of get things mixed up a bit, is that both pedals have a feedback control. So kind of like what we talked about before, a phaser can actually feed the signal back into itself. Yeah. And it gives it a certain phasey vocal quality, for lack of a better word. So if you try playing now, you start getting that kind of So if you then swap to this guy here and something, because right now it has your tone print and you disable the feedback now. So we'll get back to
we'll get back to something sensible.
So here we go. get the same sort of thing.
When you do that, it's very clear to see why people get the two of them confused.
Because they have this kind of vocal quality, and that's basically, it's the feedback that adds that quality to it.
Yes.
So if you kind of go like, these have that in common, then you go, and we can try this out. So we'll do something slow here. Okay. We'll do this, so here we go.
Very similar.
It's not quite the same, but basically on the Vortex flanger, when you set the feedback right in the middle, it's zero feedback, which would give it very much into
chorus.
And I, to be honest, I could actually, if I went into the editor and did some tweaking, I could make those two pedals not just sound the same, but be identical.
Right. Yeah.
So there is this kind of lineage where you go from like the most simple, which would be the chorus, then the flanger is kind of an add-on with the feedback, and then totally different algorithm, but the feedback kind of, give it that same effect.
So they've all got something in common with each other.
Yeah.
But just depends.
Yeah.
which one. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for taking us through the differences between all these modulation pedals. It's been very useful to me, and hopefully very useful to the people out in the internet at large.
I hope so, and thanks for helping me run through this. It's always interesting to talk to somebody who also have this kind of little bit more of a nerdy.
Rather than just a blank face. Yeah. Thanks for watching, guys. Keep it loud, and we'll see you later.